Hello, my name is Victor Bowden. Our group is doing Descent into the Abyss, World War I and the Crisis of the European Global Order. My group members are Nolan Anderson, Victor Bowden, Christian Isis, and Tyler Oberlander. First, let's talk about what started this war. World War I was known as the Great War. It happened before World War II, and it began for a multitude of reasons. One of these reasons is Germany had grown so powerful under the Kaiser Wilhelm II, and Britain, France, and Russia had formed the Triple Entente. They became the Allies. On the other hand, Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy formed the Triple Alliance, which became the Central Powers. The start of the war can be attributed to one main event, the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria.
Wow.
World at war. The war consisted of two main fronts, the Eastern Front and the Western Front. In the East, Germany and Austria-Hungary fought the Russians. In the West, the Germans fought the French and British in France. A modern war. Many new inventions were created, resulting in the mass losses of the First World War. The new Mark I tanks used by the British were utilized to break through enemy barbed wire and charge enemy lines while troops charged alongside it. Deadly poisonous gas was also used en masse, which caused many casualties. It was eventually banned worldwide because of its disastrous effects. Warfare was confined to trenches and was very terrifying. Planes were used in war at first. They started to do reconnaissance missions, but later were modified to strafing and bombing. Barbed wire and high-caliber machine guns made for a deadly combination, resulting in a heavy loss of life. In the East and Italy, the war was split in Germany's eyes. Germany was split between two fronts, the incoming French and the incoming Russians. Germany was focused on France and neglected their northern border. This enabled the Russians to defeat the little amount of German forces that were sent to the border. The Austrians attacked the Italians, who entered the war in May of 1915.
Back in Europe, each side was struggling with economic problems but managed to support the war effort with mass amounts of soldiers. Propaganda was utilized to get civilian population to support the war effort. Some were overworked, too hard though, and the Tsar was overthrown in Russia because how hard he overworked his population. Because more men were fighting in the war, women had to take over their jobs and demanded to have equal rights. After the war, women eventually gained the right to vote in Germany, Britain, and the United States. A true world war. The World War consisted of an amalgam of countries and culture, hence its name. Countries that held territories in other countries often got assistance from the countries they held, like England got assistance from their African colonies. The United States, which initially was neutral, decided to join the Allies. Japan joined the Allies and attacked German settlements in the Pacific. Italy also joined the Allies and fought back against Austria and the Central Powers. Endgame, the end of the war. With the help of the United States, the end of the war was in sight. Later in the war, the United States introduced hundreds of thousands of men into battle against the Germans, who had little with which to counter. In the last-ditch effort, Germany launched a final offensive on the Western Front after knocking Russia out of the war in the East. When it failed, German commanders facing rebellion at home on the battlefield agreed to an armistice brokered by the United States. The physical, economic, social, and psychological results of the war were costly and caused the Great Depression in many years to come. After the war, the end of the war was a blessing, but the post-war times still had troubles. The Treaty of Versailles was signed to end the war on June 28, 1919. It was not perfect though, since it excluded Russia, heavily punished Germany, and ignored the desires of Italy and Japan. The hard feelings it created led to some of the same feelings during World War II. Nationalism in the colonies of countries. Colonies of the Allies sought independence and freedom after the war. Nationalism, the patriotic feeling or support of one's country, was very prevalent after World War I. It caused colonies like India to revolt against their colonizers and mother countries.
India's path towards independence. After World War I, India saw a way to escape Britain's grasp. The Indian nationalist movement set the pattern of changes to colonial authorities in Asia and Africa. Key themes emerged, such as leadership by Western-educated elites and charismatic figures, and nonviolent forms of protest. The Indian Congress Party led its country to move towards independence. By the beginning of the 20th century, resistance to over 100 years of British rule mounted in India. Struggle toward independence. The nationalist struggle was not uniquely Indian ideal, but it was very common after the war. B.G. Tillat demanded full immediate independence and threatened violence. His rhetoric appealed to many Hindus, but frightened others, especially moderate Hindus and Muslims. Secret societies sprang up that promoted and carried out violence, but British crackdowns limited their effectiveness. The morally Minto reforms provided Indians with the education, more influenced, and legalized rights. Struggle towards freedom. The nationalist struggle was aided by the emergence of more reforms by Gandhi. The Montagu-Chelmsford reforms of 1919 provided Indian legislators with more power in order to combat the might of Britain. However, the Rowlatt Act reversed some of these reformations. Mohandas Gandhi, a new leader, encouraged peaceful protest and loosened Britain's control over India. Under his leadership, nationalist protests surged in India the 1920s and 1930s. Egypt and its thrust towards independence. Egypt, like India, sought independence from European wars. Because Egypt tried to seek independence, England decided to occupy a lot of their country. Egyptian newspapers promoted independence to nationalist ideas. The Dinshawa incident in 1906 exploited European arrogance and paved the way towards independence. A constitution and representative for Egypt was granted in 1913. In 1919, a major revolt occurred, but eventually more of Egypt was free. The revolt was led by students and women and caused British to reside in 1922.
Turkish independence. The people of Asia Minor and the Middle East also strive for independence. Ataturk, or Mustafa Kemal, emerged during the war years and rallied the Turkic forces and drove back the Greek colonizers. The Turkish made a republic based on the type in the West. Ataturk led Turkish reforms and caused radical changes like introducing a new alphabet and the veil. African liberation. People in Africa were educated and looking towards liberation. Many reformers looked into freeing Africa into an independent state. Women of different nationalities marched in hope for freedom. Women around the world fought colonial forces in hope of equality. African independence came after World War II, not World War I. They felt that because they contributed troops in the war, they deserved more rights. Global connections. World War I set many templates for the 20th century. The decline of European hegemony, the emergence of the United States and Japan on the global stage, and communist rule in Russia were results of the war, as were nationalist surges in European colonies and increased political power of labor organizations and women. Sire, thank you. This is a World War I tank I built using random Legos I found. This is the mystery object. The open letter. Dear Kaiser Wilhelm II, why did you have to have an aggressive foreign policy? You aggravated everyone and caused World War I. If only you were peaceful. Sincerely, a conclusion class group. Not crash course. The end.
Wow.